A sign of the times, perhaps, with Canada's new Prime Minister, Mark Carney, breaking with tradition and travelling to Europe, not the United States, on his first official foreign trip. Carney was greeted warmly by the French President Emmanuel Macron, and then in London, Carney met with his British counterpart, Sir Keir Starmer. The emphasis on Canada and Europe standing together side by side. And Carney did not hold back in his criticism of the US president.
Nobody's come out forcefully and said those comments about the 51st state are just not on. Do you think that our traditional allies are not sticking their necks out because they're concerned that if they say something that'll anger President Trump, that they'll be next?
I think I would take seriously what the Prime Minister of the United Kingdom said today. I don't think one needs to respond to every comment about another country. Look, we can stand up for ourselves. It's Canada strong. We can stand up for ourselves. We've called out those comments. They're disrespectful. They're not helpful. And they need to stop before, and they will have to stop before we sit down and have a conversation about our broader partnership with the United States. But we're Canada. We don't need other people to come to our aid. This trade uncertainty, the actual tariffs, but then also the uncertainty around what other trade actions could be taken by the world's largest economy are having an impact. They're having an impact on the United States itself. That impact on the United States will continue to grow. The impact of weakening U.S. economy has an impact on everyone else. But of course it has a direct impact as well on the affected countries. It's not welcome. What we see is a number of things, a number of measures that we can take ourselves. We can't control the trade policy of the United States. We don't pretend to control policies of other countries. What we can control is our own domestic economic policy. There's many opportunities in Canada. It's a very strong economy, but it could be much stronger. We could have one Canadian economy instead of 13. We can build the millions of houses that Canadians need. We can diversify our trading relationships, we can build new trading corridors, and we can fully realize what Canada is, which is an energy superpower in both clean and conventional energy, and that's exactly what we're going to do. We are going to get stronger, while those who take trade actions get weaker.
I'm Paula Newton in New York. You have been listening to Mark Carney there in London, taking questions from the press. We have Melissa Bell in Paris on standby because he was in France before he went to the UK. Melissa Bell, if you forgive me, I will... Since I am normally based in Canada, I'll just sum up what he was talking about there. First and foremost, I think for our audience, they will need to know that normally he would not be in France and the UK first. Any Prime Minister of Canada, they would normally have a visit first to the United States. Since President Trump decided to, say that he wanted to annex Canada, Mark Carney saying quite forcefully that for bilateral talks to continue, that kind of talk has to stop. They have not even had a phone call, and that was very clear. I will also say that in the UK, he was asked whether or not he discussed with the King or with UK Prime Minister Keir Starmer, whether or not in any way, shape or form, they were going to stick up for Canada and calling itself the 51st state. His answer was, we don't need other people to stick up for us. We're Canada. We'll handle this ourselves. And finally, they are talking about a blind trust that he has just been asked to put all of his assets in. It is a bone of contention because he was the chair of Brookfield Management. This is one of the largest corporations on the planet in terms of investment dollars, and many people seeking answers, although he certainly says that he has done everything by the book and it's now in a blind trust, and all of this was done ahead of schedule. Again, forgive me, Melissa Bell, I do want to ask you directly, as you know so much more about this than I do, in terms of what his meeting was like with President Macron, especially as they continue to try and meet the Trump administration where they are, right, where they are on tariffs and other issues, including Ukraine. What you thought about that line about Mark Carney saying we, in fact, are the most European of non-European nations?
It was a meeting that was remarkably close. I mean, this was Emmanuel Macron, he said, welcoming a friend to Paris and with great joy, and Mark Carney, for his part, making clear that his first visits to France, the United Kingdom, his third day visit will be to the far north in Canada. But these foreign visits were very much about speaking to reliable allies. And this, of course, as you remind our viewers quite rightly, Paula, in the context where this sort of coalition coalition of the willing is being formed to try and figure out how, not just Europe now, but a much greater alliance, 37 countries that are now in talks that hadn't been so closely involved in figuring out how they can cooperate on continued help to Ukraine. Not just Canada, of course, and all the European countries, but New Zealand, Australia, Japan as well. The idea of this visit, I think, is to show very much in line with what we heard Mark Carney say just as he was being sworn in.
Forgive me, we go back to London.
That for example, Portugal is the government of Portugal is taking steps to diversify their supply. What's also in the public domain is a very substantial effort in Europe to so-called rearm Europe, which is a significant consolidation and increase in the amount of defense spending in Europe. Now, that is of interest to us as Canada because as a potential alternative supplier. It creates the potential to create supply chains that mean that Canadian companies are participating in the development of these defense systems, and we are actively exploring. And this, full disclosure, this is one of the discussions that I had both in Paris and in the UK, was the potential participation. Now, the UK is not formally in that, but we can see, particularly given our security posture in Europe, given potential steps in Ukraine, given our own security needs, that diversification of our suppliers in a way that ensures that as much as possible of that production resides in Canada and benefits Canadians in multiple ways is a prudent thing to do. That's what I can tell you.
Bonjour, Monsieur Carney, Joël Denis Bellavance de la presse. On est tous choqués au Canada par le comportement de Donald Trump et des États-Unis. Croyez-vous que l'Amérique que l'on voit aujourd'hui, c'est l'Amérique qui va s'installer pour de bon?
And once again, we've been listening to Mark Carney there as he meets with Keir Starmer and faces questions from the media. Melissa Bell joins us again. You know, what he was speaking about there, Melissa, was the fact that they're trying to diversify their procurement on the level of defense, something that will no doubt please France, given in this whole issue about rearming Europe. They want to keep more of that defense production in Europe. And now Canada also saying that, look, where once we were going to look to the U.S. defense industry, we were going to take a very close look at the UK and Europe in terms of providing us with our defense needs.
And in question particularly, Paula, of course, is this deal with Lockheed Martin. We know that the Canadians last in 2023 had signed a deal for the purchase of 88 F-35 fighter jets from the American company. We know they've paid for 16 of those, but what we heard from Mark Carney's office, even as he headed off on this European tour, was that they could well look again at that contract and reconsider the rest of those fighter jets and look towards European suppliers, and specifically Sweden, one country that might fulfill part of their needs. So as I was saying, there is this will between these 37 countries now coming together to figure out Ukraine, not just to work on how they can cooperate on continued support to Kyiv, but also to figure out how they can think about their rearmament and their defense structures and their defense spending in a way that doesn't depend as heavily as it has on the United States. And going back to what I was saying a moment ago, it's specifically what Mark Carney said as he came into office. We're willing to sit down with the United States once Washington starts showing us some respect. So there is a sense that Canada is looking more towards European allies for strategic reasons and questions like procurement, without entirely ruling out, of course, the possibility of healthy bilateral talks with the United States. First, though, some respect is due. And I think that was probably behind what is a very strong signal of having this first visit to Europe before even that call with Washington. It was interesting at this conference earlier with Emmanuel Macron, not just the complicity and the obvious friendship and admiration between the two men, but Mark Carney switched fairly comfortably between French and English and made very forcefully the case that this was a moment also for unity to be achieved between Canada and Europe in a way that had not been sought as specifically as it is now. So a very obvious reaction to what's been said over the last few weeks by President Trump's administration, said and done, since, of course, there is the question of the tariffs. But it is certainly to a friendly audience that the new Prime Minister now turns, Paula.
Absolutely, and he has noted often, as has his cabinet, about the historical ties to France. Melissa Bell, grateful to have you with us as we continue to watch that live press conference. Appreciate it.